I wanted to open it up to questions so we can make sure we hit on the things that you guys are really interested in. So I'll let you, Dan, go ahead. I saw this hand first and then that one over there.
Ralph?
We belong to the Center for Self-Governance, and for several years have been trying to introduce legislation on activity-based costing, where it gives the voters or the citizens a really transparency in knowing how the government's spending their money. And in other states have adopted it. It's been a very useful for cutting enormous costs out of and duplication. Where do we stand on that? And I talked to Ducey before he was elected. He said he was in favor of it, but now he seems to be waffling.
But you've helped us a lot. Thank
We
you.
have, yeah,
Yes,
actually.
we went with you before.
Yeah, and you guys have done great work in coming down and visiting with folks down at the legislature on this issue. It's a bill that I sponsored, I believe it was 4 years ago, the first time I ran the bill. Bill Sondry, I don't know if he visits with you guys out in this group, but visited with me about 4 years ago, and we've been working on this issue since then. So it's an exciting development on this front. So what the question was about was activity-based costing, accounting for the government, to make sure that we have some transparency on what are the costs associated with the services that government provides. So, I mean, some easy examples. I love the example of a community in, I believe it was, well, I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm not going to say it, but there was a city that adopted cost-based accounting. And they said, basically what they said is, okay, this new mayor ran on a platform and making sure that they were going to be efficient with your tax dollars. And they said, okay, we want to know how much does it cost to fill a pothole? You know, we're going to set this measurement, and I want to know. And then we're going to go out to bid. And so we just asked, you know, what does it cost us? And the city came back to them, the city managers, and said, you know, we really don't know. He said, well, that's step number one. You know, we need to know what it cost us. And so this is what's cost-based accounting, making sure that we understand every action that the government takes, every service that we provide, what is the cost to the taxpayers? And so they did this analysis. They got the cost that it takes to fill these potholes and found the number and said, okay, we're going to go out to bid. And if we can get a bid that's lower than this, then we'll outsource this and we'll save the taxpayers money. Well, the union came to the mayor, this new mayor, and said, well, we would like to bid on this. And the mayor said, well, you know, I really have your bid. I mean, you guys have been doing this for years, and this is what it's been costing us. And the union said, well, this is new information. We've never seen this before. We had no idea how much it was costing us. And so the union went out and bid, and it actually turned out in this circumstance, the union won the bid, but they dramatically reduced their cost. I mean, could you imagine getting a union to dramatically reduce cost? I mean, I used to work, it's called competition. That's exactly right. I used to work in construction when I was in high school, and you know, I would clean footings and pour concrete, and there was a tool that would tie steel. If anybody's familiar with tying steel, and this tool, so you just kind of pull on it, and it spins the wire, and it ties it really, really quick. That tool was outlawed on union jobs because it added efficiency, and it kept costs down, and it decreased the need for labor. So that's what unions do. They don't cut costs, but this union did because of cost-based accounting. So we've had this bill, and we've been out there with the prior administration. We ran up against roadblocks, but I'm excited about a new development that I just had the executive director of the Board of Regents in my office a couple weeks ago. And they actually are looking at going to a new funding model. They've been pursuing a performance funding model that hasn't really caught on. Like I mentioned, we cut their appropriations substantially, and they're kind of floundering and trying to come up with a new way to describe what's the state's role in funding the university. And they're actually looking at going to cost-based accounting, which is actually quite ironic because I got an MBA at ASU, and I paid $60,000 for 2 years of schooling, and the cost per student at ASU was $15,000 per year, so $30,000 for this degree. So basically, what that means is that I was taxed in order to get my degree. I was charged more than the cost associated with providing this service, and so anyhow, so there's some good information that can come out of this cost analysis, and I am excited about some some new developments that might work out with the current administration.
I'm concerned with Common Core. Is the debate on Common Core over? And because Doug Ducey, I attended one of his Tea Party meetings where he was speaking, and he said he was for Common Core, and he has turned around 100% and gone for. I mean, he was
against
Common
during the
Core,
campaign,
and now he's supposedly for Common Core.
It's an excellent question, and you're right. The governor ran in opposition to Common Core. My impression is that he's in his appointments to the State Board of Education, which is the entity that adopted Common Core. He's kind of straddled the fence. He's appointed some who are opposed to Common Core and some who in support of Common Core. So it's a little bit of a mixed record on exactly what his position has been in governing. But you're absolutely right that he certainly did campaign in opposition to Common Core. I also oppose Common Core and do still oppose Common Core. We've had many efforts at the legislature to undo Common Core, and we can do that. We can do that with legislation. It wasn't the legislature that enacted it. It was the State Board of Education, but the State Board of Education enacts the policies that the legislature passes and as directed by the governor. And so we can legislatively require them to repeal it, and we've had bills to do that. I supported those bills. Unfortunately, we were not successful in getting the bills out of the Senate. So unfortunately, that's the status today. Not because of Biggs, because of the votes that in the Senate. You can only lose, I believe, 3 Republicans, maybe 4 in the Senate, and if all the Democrats oppose or are on the other side of the issue, then you don't get that bill. So we were unsuccessful. I'm sure there will be continued efforts in the legislature, but until we elect a legislature that is a majority of the legislature that is opposed to Common Core, then we're likely in the current status quo. Diane Douglas has done her best to challenge the board, and she's run up against roadblocks as well. So that's kind of the status where we're at. We're continuing the effort, continuing the fight, but that's where we're at right now. So I saw this one, I'll just let you call on them and you hand them out. So go ahead.
2 questions, a real simple one. Does 301 have an expiration date?
Excellent question. Portions of Proposition 301 do. The sales tax is set to expire in 2020. The inflation requirement does not expire, unfortunately.
Okay, second question, a little tougher. We keep talking about the Great Recession, and people talk about coming out of the economy starting to pick up. But by a lot of measures, the systemic problems in the country are about no better now than they were in 2008 before everything fell apart. Are people moving forward conscious that we may hit another dip similar to what we hit in 2008?
Absolutely. In our budget discussions, that's the thing that keeps me awake at night and keeps me advocating for using the lowest budget estimates that are realistic. And that's why we're in a situation now where this budget cycle, we actually see several hundred millions of dollars more than we had estimated when we prepared the budget. Because I was not going to adopt a budget based on rosy projections that were not going to materialize. And so we certainly are preparing for the worst, so that and then hoping for the best, but making sure that we don't spend ourselves into a situation should the worst occur.
Some of the cities in Arizona tax rentals, tax the people that are renting, which is usually the low-income people. So what we're doing, we are hurting these low-income producing people. So, and to me, it's not fair. So, I understand somebody in the legislature has been looking at it. So, where do you stand on that?
Absolutely. No, that's an excellent question. We did see a bill last session. Darren Mitchell sponsored a bill to repeal the lease, the residential lease sales tax, and I supported that bill. We saw that bill in the Ways and Means Committee. I was a strong proponent of that bill, voted yes. I believe we saw it in my committee, in the Appropriations Committee as well, because it had an impact on revenues. And so I supported it. I put it on the agenda, and we heard it in that committee as well. I believe, I'm trying to remember what the fate of the bill was, if it died before getting to the floor, so it was not heard on the floor. So I wholeheartedly support that, in addition to addressing that sales tax on leases. We also need to do a reform on the compliance for landlords in complying with this lease tax. With the sales tax simplification that occurred, there was a complication of the sales tax compliance for residential rental owners. And I'll just give you a real quick explanation of what occurred. So Mesa allowed, and other cities allowed, an owner of many different parcels to file one return. It was one little piece of paper that said, these are all of the rents that I collected, and here's the sales tax. It's a very reasonable way to account for the sales tax that you owe. Other jurisdictions like Chandler and other cities required the owners to file an individual return on every single property that they own. So you can imagine, if you own 30 or 40 rental properties, this becomes a very significant compliance burden that's placed on you that doesn't benefit anybody. Although I say that, but really I believe the reason why Chandler and some of those want this is because they have a filing fee, like a $5 filing fee, and so you get this for every single filing. Well, the filing fee is supposed to represent the cost that the city bears in processing these applications. Well, if that's actually the case, then they would see a commensurate reduction in cost when they stopped processing 30 and 40 for every rental and just processed one. But obviously they're collecting more than their cost, and so this is a revenue stream for them. But exactly, and so there are solutions that can occur. I had a bill to address this and say, you know what? Okay, if because of TPT simplification, the state is now the tax collector rather than the cities on all TPT, and so the state needed a uniform policy. Well, let's choose the one that's more reasonable and less of a burden on taxpayers. Let's choose the model that Mesa and other cities have followed, and I had a bill to do that. We ran up against some roadblocks that we're hoping to overcome this next session and be successful in passing that bill.
I want to jump in and piggyback on that. There's a similar process that applies to any retail sales or service, not just real estate, where the use tax has to be paid, and whoever the business owner is, if they have business practice, not even brick and mortar at different cities, they have to go through the same thing. And this recent change that was supposed to simplify it has likewise also made that more complicated for business owners who are now, with small business, having to do triple the paperwork they once did.
Right. Yeah, and so what we were trying to accomplish with the TPT simplification is, like as Dan was mentioning, if I'm a plumber or an HVAC technician and I go around all over the state doing services, then I have to collect transaction privilege tax in every jurisdiction that I'm doing service. And it's a tremendous burden. Not only do I have to file several different returns, I'm subject to audit from every one of these municipalities and the state, and I have to make a payment to every single one of these. So I'm cutting checks. You know, obviously any business owners out here know that there's a burden associated with every single one of those processes. And so with transaction privilege tax simplification, what we did, or what we're trying to do, is to move all of those processes into one location. So the state would be the one audit that a business would be subject to, instead of the multiple different municipalities in which they do business. There would be one audit, there would be one payment, and there would be one return. So that was the end goal. There were some challenges in accomplishing that, primarily with prime contracting. So if you're a contractor building houses or building any other type of building, roads and so on, then there were some challenges. We tried to move all of that to a simplified solution of one audit, one return, and one payment, but we were unsuccessful in getting there. And because we weren't able to get all the way there, then there are challenges that are yet to be resolved, and we're continuing to address those.
Just one quick statement. There's 36 municipalities, so it may simplify by paying at the state, but there's different filing requirements, different rates, different this or that, and they do it overnight in the city council, and then they make threats to us property managers saying you go to jail for 6 months if you make a mistake. So,
You're right.
okay, but anyway, my real question is, a lot of us here fought
Make a quick comment on that comment, because that's a key issue, and that is that step one of simplification was
One
unifying one payment, one return, and one audit. Step two was unifying the base, and that's a much bigger hill to climb. And so, you know, it has been so much of a challenge just to get to one payment, one audit, and one return. But absolutely, I wholeheartedly agree that to really ease the burden of business owners, you've got to unify the base as well.
Okay, my real question is, a lot of us here fought against Medicaid expansion. Am I saying that right? Yes. And just wonder, and then the ex-governor pushed it through. Are we seeing any financial consequences of this? I don't know what's happened after her that.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Well, basically what happened with the governor's proposal that I did not support and I worked against, but a majority of the legislature supported it. It passed. What the major impact was a substantial tax increase on healthcare providers, the bed tax, and that's where most of the cost has been absorbed. So that cost absorbed the expansion in conjunction with the added tax dollars that were received from the state. And you'll remember that was Governor Brewer's principal reason for supporting this expansion, was that it wasn't going to cost the state any money. Well, you know, my concern was that, you know, I'm not just concerned with state tax dollars. You know, in fact, I'm much more concerned with the fiscal solvency or insolvency of the federal government. And this was a critical question that all states collectively had to make. Are we going to comply with Obamacare and this dramatic increase in entitlement spending at the federal level? That's what she supported. That's what a majority of the legislature supported, and that's what ended up occurring. Nearly half of the states said no, said we're not going to do that, and that was the position that I had. We need to rise up as states and say, you know what, enough is enough. At the federal government, we're borrowing over 47% of every dollar that we spend. We can't keep doing this. Let's say no. We are the entities that have actually shown some fiscal responsibility. We need to lead by example, and we need to say no. Unfortunately, we did not. So it hasn't really impacted state budget, but it has dramatically increased spending of your federal tax dollars. Exactly. That's exactly right. He's saying that the governor of Texas is saying they're not going to fund Obamacare, and I agree that that's the position that the states need to be taking. That, you know what, yeah, we have a lot of entitlements. This is just one additional entitlement. It doesn't solve the problem by saying no, but at least we're not going in the wrong direction. We need to be solving the problem, not adding to it.
I think we got far too many of these programs with people with their hands. Gimme, gimme, gimme. What is the state of Arizona, do we fund Planned Parenthood?
You know, I'm glad that you brought that up, because that gives me an opportunity to talk about another bill that I sponsored.
Because I'm totally against my tax dollars going to buy some girls pregnancy pills or condoms for some guy or whatever. I don't care what it is. My grandparents raised 17 kids. And the times were a lot easier now than they were then. If they can't afford to buy their own birth control pills, I'm totally against it. I'm really upset with this whole thing. So that's one program we can cut out through the whole nation. We got a lot of health care. Look at all these, you know, women can go to another health care facility or whatever. We don't have to have all of that.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I actually sponsored the bill 3 years ago. I sponsored the bill. You remember that Congress, the House of Representatives, at the time the Senate controlled, the Democrats controlled the Senate, the House of Representatives passed the bill to say no longer can Planned Parenthood be a Medicare or Medicaid provider. And of course, it was lost in Harry Reid's desk. And so immediately, states began passing this, saying, well, let's do it here in Arizona. I sponsored that bill, and I was successful in getting it passed in Arizona. And the Governor Brewer, signed that bill to her credit. I was very excited to have passed that bill. Unfortunately, the Obama administration and Planned Parenthood sued, and the court found in their favor that as long as the federal government says that Planned Parenthood can be a provider, states don't have the ability to exclude these individuals from coverage. Very, very upsetting. Very, very upsetting so what I'm hopeful that we might be able to leverage the recent illumination of the real disgusting nature of Planned Parenthood and be successful in Congress. It only takes just a few pro-life Democrats in the Senate they don't even have to vote for the bill, they just have to vote for cloture and end a filibuster on the bill and allow this bill to get to the president's desk. I think we all know where he stands on this issue, but at least we would get it up to him and put him on record, make him accountable for continuing to send your tax dollars to an organization that you feel is morally wrong, and you should not be compelled to spend your dollars on that organization. I agree wholeheartedly and am hopeful that we can be successful when we have a new president, that we can end it at the federal level. And we'll continue the fight at the state level. We'll continue the fight. Because the court ruled that we could not exclude Planned Parenthood from being a participant in Medicaid. It is wrong. I agree wholeheartedly. And I actually have just recently had some conversations with representatives from the Attorney General's office to see, is there another approach? Is there something else that we can do to get the state out of the business of subsidizing Planned Parenthood? That was the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, unfortunately. And the Supreme Court had an opportunity to hear the case and turn it down. We did appeal it to the Supreme Court, but they did not give a writ of certiorari, or however you pronounce it.
My question is on municipal corporations. Is there any way we can restrict municipal corporations in their actions? Because in the city of Mesa, for city government, they have one set of rules, and for the municipal corporation, which is all of the water, all water treatment, all of the sewer treatment, have a different set of rules. Is there any way that, or is anybody working on this?
So these special districts, the community facilities districts and the water districts and so on, is that what your question is?
No, this is, the city of Mesa has a municipal corporation for the water treatment facilities, which they own, and they borrow money on bonding, and the bonding rates are much higher for the municipal corporation, which is not really governmental, but the government controls it.
Yeah, I believe that I had a bill that was getting at the same issue that you're discussing, and it was creating some debt limits for these special municipal districts and saying that, look, we need to rein this in. A lot of these districts do have debt that is quite extraordinary, and they try to argue that it's not general obligation debt. Well, the reality is that if it's debt that has the appearance that it's backed by the full faith and credit of the taxpayers, then it really is pledging your full faith and credit, and we need to make sure that that's only done to the extent that the voters approve of. And so it's been a challenge. It's been a big challenge. I sponsored that bill, and the lobbying effort from these organizations came down in force, and I think that the reason, that doesn't, just because there's a lot of lobbying against a bill doesn't mean I can't get it through. But I think the reason why they were successful is because it was difficult for for members to see why this was so important. So, we'll continue the effort and continue to try and overcome that obstacle.
That was a meeting on the side. And
Absolutely, be happy
Okay.
to do that.
All right, thank you.
Getting back to the area of the deficits that are going to be created for the retirement funds, so many of them have been self-inflicted by allowing people to fold in a lot of overtime, vacation time, and sick time, and a lot of the people are getting more money now on their retirement than they were when they were on their regular salaries. And I certainly hope the state isn't going to hold up the taxpayers to fund the difference.
That's an excellent question. And to get to the first part of your question and then the second part, you're absolutely right. The pension or salary spiking is a big part of the problem. And so we certainly are taking this into consideration. And one of the components of the proposal that we're hoping to get support for will be to eliminate overtime from the calculation of your base salary, and that's a simple reform that makes sense. That you should be calculating your benefit based on the actual salary that you received. If you want to work overtime, that's fine, you get paid for it, but it doesn't go into the base that you're calculating your pension based on. And so there's that reform. There's some other reforms that are being looked at. What I advocated for is, why not, like Social Security, why don't we just look at your career earnings rather than the top 3 of the last 5 years? That completely eliminates any incentive to do pension spiking. Your benefit's going to reflect the amount that you paid into the system. So there are a few different approaches that we're trying to look at on that regard. And to your second question, again, it's this battle with the courts that we see on so many issues that can be so very frustrating. And just one tangential issue related to that is to make sure that when you get opportunities to support some judicial reform, that we look for those opportunities. There was an opportunity on the ballot just an election or 2 ago that unfortunately was not successful, to change the selection process for our judges to get the governor more influence and limit the influence of the Arizona board, the Arizona Bar Association. And so that's what's happened with the pensions as well. I co-sponsored a bill in my first year in the legislature, Senate Bill 1609, that dramatically reduced benefits in order to address this unfunded liability. And that bill, Senate Bill 1609, was struck down by the courts and is largely why we're in the situation that we're in today, because all of those savings that we realized over those 3 or 4 years has gone away and actually put us into a deeper hole because those savings went away. And so to get to your question about whether the taxpayers are going to have to pay for this, unfortunately, the taxpayers are largely going to pay for the unfunded deficit for existing benefits. But what we're trying to accomplish is to set up a system that's not going to create a deficiency in the future, that actually can shift a lot of that liability away. So the reason that the court found that the state could not enact these reforms, what are some of the reforms? We changed the permanent benefit increase for PSPRS. Every year there was an automatic increase regardless of the status of the fund, regardless of actual inflation or actual changes to the cost of living. We reduced that and said that's only going to occur if the fund is sufficiently funded. If the funded status reaches certain benchmarks, then you'll see a permanent benefit increase. Otherwise, you're not going to. The court said that because the voters had enacted into the Constitution a clause that says that benefits shall not be diminished, then the legislature cannot enact this reform. And, you know, I think that's probably a reasonable interpretation. We certainly had a reasonable interpretation as well, that was an increase to benefits and we just took away an increase. But that is in the Constitution. And so if we are going to be successful in accomplishing the reforms that we're working on, likely it's going to be sending something to the ballot to exempt the reforms that we enact from this diminishment clause that the voters enacted into the Constitution. So that's right. Right.
Hey, how are you doing? One more question?
Yep.
All right. So let him have a drink of water. We have a question here.
Under the Affordable Care Act, and since the state of Arizona going ahead and participate of the subsidy, how would Arizona, in terms of deficit spending, going to be increased by because of the supplement, income from the federal government?
So let me make sure I understand your question. So you're asking how Arizona's deficit will increase as a result of the Affordable Care Act? Well, largely it's unaffected because the bed tax increase that passed in conjunction with the expansion of the Medicaid and Medicare, no, Medicaid. So that bed tax paid for the state's portion, and then the federal government is paying the rest. And now we actually, I'm a plaintiff in a lawsuit, along with several of my colleagues at the legislature. A majority of all of the Republicans are on this lawsuit. And we're actually suing, saying that the passage of the Affordable Care Act in Arizona, the portion that Arizona had to enact in the Medicaid expansion, violated Proposition 108. So I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with this. Proposition 108 says that the legislature cannot pass a tax increase unless a supermajority authorizes the tax increase. Well, this tax increase, this bed tax, did not pass with a supermajority. And so we are suing and saying that this was an unlawful enactment of this tax. Now, so we're excited about this, excited to see what happens. There is risk associated with this strategy, because if we're successful in saying that this was a violation of Proposition 108, which I hope that we are, because if we're not, then virtually that limit goes away. There's virtually no protection on the state enacting a tax increase with just a simple majority. So I'm very hopeful that we will be successful in the court in that lawsuit. But if we are, then that actually will rule that that tax that was enacted is unlawful, and the expansion then will be questionable on whether the court strikes down the expansion as well. So that tax would go away. Then the state actually could be in a situation of needing to either fund the cost that tax was funding, or undoing the expansion. And certainly that was the hope of those of us who are suing, saying that this was an unlawful enactment, was that the expansion would go away. But if it does not go away, then the state would be on the hook for that. So that's still pending before the court, and it's probably going to take some time yet for that to reach a conclusion. The first decision was, I believe, just a few months ago, and that was a decision on standing, and that was a critical question. Many times the court, if they just kind of want to take a pass on the issue and don't want to address it, then the court could have ruled that the legislature did not have standing, that because the legislators who were plaintiffs in this state were not impacted by this tax, that it would have to be, because you have to have been harmed in order to have standing in court to sue. And so their argument would be that it would have to be the hospitals that would sue. And the hospitals benefited from this because of the expansion, and so they all were advocating for it. So we did win on that question. We did win on standing, that said, we were harmed because this Proposition 108 in the Constitution strengthens your voice. When you send me down to the legislature to vote against tax increases, it strengthens that vote. I don't need to be joined by a majority of the representatives down there. I need to be joined by a smaller minority. And so when that passed without that supermajority, then then I was harmed. The voice that you all have at the Capitol was harmed, and so we did win on that first round. I was very excited about that. The court did determine that we do have standing, but it's going to be a long, thought-out process to see what the outcome will be of that case. So, there's a question back there. Are we running out of time? I'm happy to stay as long as you guys want me to, but I don't want to. No, I'm good. So why don't we do these last two questions and then we'll wrap up.
Hello, is this? Hello. Last two sessions of the Arizona legislature, I've been working with a group, and we've introduced resolutions in both the House and the Senate for calling for Congress to pass the act restoring the GlassSteagall Act. In the past, we've had Kate Brophy McGee pocket veto those bills because, you know, she's in the pocket of the banks, put it bluntly. Is there another way to go with that kind of thing rather than going through hers? Because I had a meeting with her and 7 bankers 3 weeks ago, where there were 7 on one side of the table and myself and one other guy on the other. And we offended the bankers because I told them you're treating people like animals. They took offense at that. And then they came back and said, well, animals, the guy from Wells Fargo Bank came back and said, well, animals are smarter than people. Okay? Now, is there a way to do that without having to go through Kate Brophy McGee's thing? Because she's not going to. All it is a resolution. The bankers don't even want you talking about what GlassSteagall is all about, because it goes in and it changes our banking system from one of speculation and usury to what it used to be like, and what made this country great is a system of development where we put money into the economy not by letting the bankers benefit by loaning it. We create economic platforms. And that's the banks don't want to lose the control of that, so they don't even want you to talk about it.
Right, yeah, that is quite remarkable. You're right, a postcard to Congress, you know, seems like something that wouldn't really get on their radar, so that is somewhat interesting that they're working to oppose a resolution that we're just going to send to Congress saying that we support this. So, but to get to your question, yeah, there are ways to get around a committee chair. It can be a challenge, and so certainly it is more difficult if the chair of the committee that your bill naturally is assigned to opposes the bill. But there are ways. Certainly you can strike a bill. You can amend the bill onto a bill that has already passed the House, that's over in the Senate. If you do that, you amend it over in the Senate, then it comes back and it's voted on by the whole House, and it never goes back to a committee in the House. So there are ways, but it does create more of a challenge if the chair of the committee that the bill would go to doesn't support it. So yeah, I'd be happy to talk with you if you'd like to get more insights on exactly how that works. So was there a question there in the back?
Since the Supreme Court, they came and did their ruling regarding gay marriage, and of course, Arizona has it's 30. Yeah, in the Arizona state constitution, it's something or other 30, defining marriage between a man and between a man and a woman. Are there any plans at addressing, I think it's Title 25 of the Arizona state statutes? Is that going to be up for the next session? If so, who are the people behind it? Who's going to be scouring Title 25 and looking at the statutes to make sure that we comply both with Title or Chapter 30 of the state constitution and the Supreme Court ruling? Who's going to bridge that gap, I guess?
Well, and maybe I don't quite understand what you're asking. So the Supreme Court ruling overturned the state's constitutional amendments defining marriage between as being the union of one man and one woman. So you're asking, are we going to do something so that we comply both with that ruling and with the definition of marriage in our state constitution?
I guess, well, okay, we'll put it this way. In order to comply with the wishy-washy whatever with the Supreme Court, who's going to be looking at Title 25 of the Arizona state statutes and basically rewriting it to make sure that, well, we do as much as we can to preserve the sanctity of the family and yet still I'm trying to think of the lie on our backs while the Supreme Court walks over us with the most dignity as possible. So who's looking at rewriting Title 25?
No, I think I get what you're getting at. Well, a great organization that's doing some excellent work on all of these fronts that have to do with protecting, having statutes that support the family. Is the Center for Arizona Policy, as well as many other groups like Focus on the Family and others. But specifically in Arizona, Center for Arizona Policy is very involved in looking at, what are some of the next steps that we can do in the face of the recent court ruling to make sure that we here in Arizona have the statutes that will be most conducive to having strong families and strong societies. So we certainly will continue that effort to make sure that we do everything that we can in our statutes within the abilities that are available to us to strengthen the family.
I thought when he started out he was trying to nullify it, but I would nullify it. Somehow just pass that law again and let them throw it out again.
Excellent. Yeah, and she said that there's certainly, that it's not entirely resolved exactly how this is going to occur. You've got the Kentucky clerk and who was thrown in jail for what she viewed as being required to violate her freedom of religion that's protected by the Constitution and then
the one I just addressed to you was that the governor of Texas just announced that Texas will not issue any marriage licenses to anything but a man and a woman. So it's just nullification.
Yeah. Well, so it certainly will be interesting to see how that plays out. So, all right. Well, this will be the very last question. Then yeah. All right. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I raised my hand.
Okay, well, I just want to thank you guys for having me out here tonight. It's been a real pleasure to be with you guys, and I did want to mention, I know it was brought up previously about was it your mother who had 17 kids? Your grandmother, 17 kids. That's very, 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 very fascinating. I'm also a supporter of big families. We actually just had our 8th child, so I'm very, very excited and gonna get home and see the family before they all go to bed. But thank you for having me here tonight. It's been a real pleasure.